Hi, my name's Justin Johnson. This is my reading reflection video for ED 508, Exploring Diversity. Okay, so to start out with, I want to talk about White Privilege by Peggy McIntosh. This article really hit home with me. It wasn't something I really thought about before this class. I'd heard the term, I knew I was at some advantage, but I was kind of oblivious to a lot of it. I never thought about, Band-Aids being white, flesh-colored. I never thought about picking up a picture frame and seeing white people on it, or any book or magazine for that matter. It's part of that obliviousness she mentions. So here's some stuff I wrote down. Whites are taught to think of their lives as morally neutral, normative, and average, and also ideal, so that when we want to benefit others, this is seen as work which will allow them, being non-whites, to be more like us, whites. Obliviousness about white advantage is strongly enculturated in the United States to maintain the myth of meritocracy, the myth that democratic choice is available to all. That's pretty big. I mean, being a white male, I was somewhat oblivious to the advantage I had, but I was actually more aware of gender inequality than racial inequality. It might be because race is such a touchy issue in the United States, even though it's everywhere. It's forced down our throats. It's on, newspapers and news headlines about, the different demographics. I don't know, I've just always been aware of gender more. I took a gender studies course in my undergraduate school, and, I recognize that women would be paid a lower salary for the same position as a male, or being passed up for jobs that, even if they have the same credentials as a man, you can be a receptionist, but you can't be a manager, kind of thing. So, yeah, and my mom she's very big into women's rights and all that, so that's just something I've always thought about. My wife recently told me about a video she showed to her high school social studies class dealing with this issue of racial inequality and meritocracy, and does it exist. And they followed a white man and a black man with the exact same class, education, credentials, all that stuff. As far as looking at a paper goes, they were pretty much the same person except for their names. They followed him in various situations. Both men went to the same location separately and were treated very differently. For example, at a car dealership, the white man was offered nicer cars at better rates than the black man, who was actually shown worse cars at higher rates. That's kind of screwed up. In job interviews, the white man was treated better, and they were more receptive to him working there than the black man. And it's pretty alarming. I think we like to think we're an equal culture, and Martin Luther King did so much, but that's just not the case. White privilege has obvious implications in education as well. Minority students are disciplined more often than white. They're even graded differently, and it's more of that disconscious racism that we've talked about. Nobody admits they're racist, and I'm sure most people would say they're equal and fair in their treatment of other ethnicities, but it can't really be helped. Schools themselves are inherently white middle-class institutions, so even if a teacher is democratic and fair with their students, the institution may work against their efforts. Minority students do not neatly fall into our white middle-class framework, so they suffer.
It's not that easy being green,
or black, or brown, or any other color than white. Sorry, Kermit. The white privilege article really opened my eyes about the state of racial inequality in our country, and just how the white majority is so unaware of the social injustice that happens every single day. So now I kind of want to try to connect this to the achievement gap, and so I'm going to start off with talking about Ladson Billings' article. Go Pack. Okay, so according to Ladson Billings, the term achievement gap produces more than 11 million citations on Google. Those on both ends of the political spectrum invoke it, and it is, quote, one of the most pressing education policy challenges that states currently face. So everyone is talking about the achievement gap, a problem in the U.S. education system that has been happening for decades. Yet nothing drastic is being done. It seems to me that rather than trying to address the issue, educators have just kind of accepted it as the way things are. So we've learned in this course that the achievement gap and the education debt created by the achievement gap is about poverty, not race. Yeah, poverty, not race. So, what you gonna do about it? Huh? Well, how are we gonna break the cycle? Throw money at it? Money fixes everything, right? Easier said than done. So, each state decides their own spending on education and per pupil spending. They decide their budget. But what happens when the state's already in debt, and in many cases has been for some time? It seems like every year in North Carolina, and in Wake County specifically, we hear how the budget has been slashed again and again and again and again. My wife, who teaches civics and economics in high school, and has been teaching in Wake County, she's coming up on her 3rd year. So she's still a newbie, but she's in the system, so she knows a little bit more about it than I do. She pointed out to me that education is a very, very large part of most states' budgets. In North Carolina, she looked it up. Health and Human Services is the only budget item that was larger than education, and Health and Human Services, things like welfare, food stamps, etc. But education is the next biggest thing, and yet we hear that we are one of the lowest in the countries for per pupil spending. So what's going on? Ladson Billings says, in the case of education, each effort we make towards improving education is counterbalanced by the ongoing and mounting debt that we have accumulated. That debt service manifests itself in the distrust and suspicion about what schools can and will do in communities serving the poor and children of color. She goes on to say, I argue that the magnitude of the education debt erodes that trust and represents a portion for the debt service that teachers and administrators pay each year against what they might rightfully invest in helping students advance academically. So what does that mean? The debt here, she's talking about the education debt and how, you know, we've had this achievement gap for so long. The education debt is worse and worse and worse and worse because we're creating a subculture of uneducated and failures because of this gap, because of the schools just kind of saying, well, they're going to drop out anyways, so let's just push them through.